All right, so today we have to talk a little bit more about the hypocrisy of the mainstream media. Now, in hearing or seeing this title, I'm sure most people probably know what I'm talking about, but if you don't, it's titled Biden Administration Prepares to Open Overflow Facility for Migrant Children. Now, what am I getting at here? Well, if you remember under the Trump administration, there was all this uproar because there were pictures of these facilities on the border that had kids in them, and all the anti-Trump, leftists just completely lost their minds. Now, the problem that none of these people told you is that number one, this way of dealing with this issue, it was started under the Obama administration, and two, those pictures were taken during the Obama administration. So that's the first lie that no one told you. And the other lie, too, is that the Biden administration is keeping it going. They're just changing the name, right? They're just changing the name. And, there's a lot of important aspects to this, too, but I think the biggest one, it's just another testament. Not that we need it anymore. Like, again, like, if you needed another piece of evidence to not trust the mainstream media, I really don't have words for you. But this is more of a just, add it to the list kind of thing. And that this is just another reason that and again, like the thing you need to point out here too is that people are so blinded by this stuff too that rather than thinking of it as Trump, Biden, Obama, let's just think about it as person one, person two, person three, right? They're all they're all doing the exact same thing. So why is it only a big deal when one person does it, right? Now the reality is that it's a big deal because it's the different side, right? And that when the Democrats do it, it's the worst thing in the world. But when Trump does it, or sorry, when the Democrats do it, it's fine. But when Trump does it, it's the biggest deal in the world, right? In that Obama was deporting people, I believe, at a higher rate than Trump was, especially in the later term or the later times. But again, Trump deports someone and he's the worst person in the world, right? And that again, like people need to, this is the worst thing about people these days, even a lot of people that I think are somewhat respectable, and that when they have these discussions, they just can't get it out of their head. Oh, Trump did it, so it must be bad, right? Kenny did it, so it must be bad, right? And I mean it happens, they would say it happens on the other side as well. And I would acknowledge that's true. The only difference being is that, or the big difference being is that the mainstream media is heavily biased to the left, right? Especially in Canada, right? And again, the argument they bring up, well, in the States, it's all Fox News, even though Fox News is center right, even if you want to be generous. I mean, I think most people that actually have their heads on straight would say, yeah, Fox maybe has Tucker Carlson, who's actually more right wing, and maybe Hannity. But again, aside from that, they're all about as centrist milk toast as you can possibly get, right? I mean, you look at who's the guy who did the first debate is a Democrat, right? So again, like the idea that Fox is this crazed right wing network, maybe at one point they were, but they're not anymore, right? And in Canada, you have like, oh, what are you talking about? We have the National Post and garbage like that. But again, like I have never heard a conservative who I know or who even online that I've seen that ever talks up the National Post. Like not once. But pretty much every leftist person I know or who I've came across either watches the mainstream media or at the very least will defend the mainstream media. I don't think I've ever heard a leftist be overly critical of CBC in Canada. Like I don't think I have. I maybe have, but I don't. Not that I can recall. Right? Again, they either watch them, in which case they think they're great, or two, at the very least they'll defend them. Right? So that is the big problem. Like again, it shouldn't. If it's shocking to you for me to point out that the mainstream media is incredibly biased, then again, I really don't know what to tell you. You've been living under a rock for your life, because not only is the mainstream media biased, they're incredibly biased, and it's not necessarily just a bias thing as well. The mainstream media is also heavily biased in favor of the establishment, right? take for example how the mainstream media clearly favored Hillary Clinton over Bernie Sanders in 2016, right? So again, it's not entirely a political thing. At the end of the day, it's an establishment thing as well, right? Um, so yeah, that's another thing to point out too, is that people don't really understand that either. And this is another reason why progressives are absolutely insane, is because progressives like to brand themselves as being anti-establishment, but they'll also be the most virulent, defenders of like the mainstream media, for example, right? And that's why they never. I mean, they get in power a lot. They oftentimes get a lot of stuff done, but at the end of the day, that's why they never actually end up gaining ground really. And by that I mean they never actually really do something and have it actually work out, I guess is a better way of putting it. But yeah, this is a very important aspect for people to understand. Like it's so important. And the other important thing I think here to bring up too, that now that I think about it too, is that I know quite a bit of people, and I think this is something that you see a lot in society as well. In fact, I know it is. People that don't necessarily watch the news, right? This is something that you see a lot of from younger people, right? They don't watch the news. They'll probably even tell you they don't trust the news, but their worldview, their political opinions, their political beliefs are still run through the mainstream media, right? And that you see this all the time, right? And that um, people, they don't watch the news, right? They don't watch the news, but they'll bring up this political topic, and their angle is always exactly what the mainstream media is going to try to get across. Like stuff like this is a perfect example, right? So again, they don't necessarily watch the news, but their political beliefs are still filtered through the exact same lens, right? The exact same lens. The only difference being is I think the people who don't watch the news are a little bit better, and that again, I think they at least know that it's garbage. But what they don't understand is that it's still filtered through the exact same way, right? Um, so again, that's a very important point too. And again, people probably wonder, okay, well, what do you do? Like, where do you go to get news? Well, number one, it has to be independent. Like, it has to be independent. And anybody who's getting corporate money, I mean, if they're on TV, I would say I don't care who it is. If they're on TV, I wouldn't trust them. Like, I wouldn't trust them if they're on TV. So that is one rule of thumb that I would say, is that if they're on the TV, you can't trust them, right? At least especially in Canada. Maybe there's someone in the States that I'm forgetting or don't know about, but at least in Canada, you don't trust them if they're on the TV. The second thing I would look for is simply, I mean, number one, I think you want to get, you don't want to get, just one point of view. You want to get um, a variety of points of view. But the way you can do, you want to do that through the least amount of people, right? At the end, you don't want to be listening to 100 people, because that's, people don't have enough time, right? Everybody's got a limited amount of time. So the best thing to do is find people that entertain all sorts of different arguments, right? People that entertain, that doesn't necessarily mean they have to agree with them, right? That's completely irrelevant. um, the way you can tell that people's worldviews are usually routed in a lot of truth and reality is that they'll entertain these worldviews, and they'll actually, work their way through it to a net. I mean, again, like you look at these progressives, right, and that there's not one argument that they'll entertain that differs from their own, right? If you don't want free healthcare, that means you hate the poor people. If you don't want a big giant welfare state, it means you hate the poor people. If you don't want mass immigration, it means you're a racist. Like all of this. If you don't want gun control, then it means you want to go kill people, right? Again, like they can't entertain ideas that differ from theirs. And I'm not saying that's all progressives, but it is most of them. It's probably the overwhelming majority of them in my experience. And doesn't mean conservatives are perfect either. Again, I think conservatives have a lot of issues. I mean, take Canada for example, as Exhibit A. But again, I'm not going to name anyone specifically. But the point being is that I think you can tell when people are credible. Number one, because they're independent, right? Their growth, I mean, if they're making money off it, their income isn't dependent upon corporate people, right? And not to mention too, another good thing too would be for people that won't sell themselves out for money, right? There is someone that's, a lot of fairly prominent people, I'm sure people can think of them off the top of their head, that clearly have sold their soul for money, at least to some degree, or Another way, I think another very good way is people refuse to touch certain issues, right? That people and it doesn't necessarily mean that, like, because again, everybody won't touch certain issues, but certain issues that are relevant, right? Certain issues that are relevant, like people who won't touch, mass immigration, people who won't touch the truth behind, why blacks are in jail more, the people who won't touch the real reason that the wealth gap exists. Again, just stuff like that off the top of my head. People who won't touch those issues. Again, I wouldn't trust them. Like I wouldn't trust them. So anyway, that's what I wanted to bring up today. If you liked the video, make sure you hit that like and subscribe if you haven't already. Make sure you check out those links below. Follow me on those other platforms if you haven't already. If you want to donate, you can do that as well. But like I said, at the very least, just hit that like and subscribe and stay tuned for more.